Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hodge, again, I didn't have my glasses on, so now I can't read my own writing. Was it you that said that...
Borrow mine.
What's that? Thank you, yeah. 1.75, anyway. Was it you that said that private investment will give you about a 10% return and government investment about 5%, and that is the opportunity cost of having it filter through the government?
Exactly. Actually, that's the Congressional Budget Office in a very in-depth report and analysis of the returns to infrastructure spending found that data, that government investments return about half the returns of private sector investments for a variety of reasons.
Okay, just hold that. Just hold that.
Yeah.
So Ms. Straughter mentioned how she feels as if the investment that may come through what is being called the infrastructure package or something such as that may help her business grow. But what I'm hearing is that if that is an economically viable project, and if you were to do the same thing through the private sector, you would have more bang for your buck, less friction costs, and that you may either have more investment or investment not just there but someplace else. Is that the logical conclusion from the CBO study?
That's exactly right. And what they did not take into account is the harm to the economy of taxing those dollars in the first place in order to pay for the investment. So there are really two hits to the economy. One is the opportunity costs of a lower investment through government. The other is through the economic harm through the taxes that are raised in order to pay for it.
Yeah, I do find that government tends to take care of itself. I noticed Ms. Straughter is in a building where all the teachers have been teaching remotely. I suspect if you went to a private or parochial school, well, maybe not. Maybe Boston's locked down everybody. But if we go to Chicago, we know that some schools have been open, some have not, and the government employees are the ones who've not. I say that as a government employee. There is a certain investment that you make. Mr. Gamage, Dr. Gamage, I'm sorry, I apologize. Let me find my question here. I've been told that since 1990, at least 9 European countries with the wealth tax have abandoned it, leaving only 3 that retain a wealth tax. What are your thoughts about that, and why should that inspire confidence in the ability to administer such?
Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. With respect, it's Gamage, not Gamage.
I'm sorry, Gamage?
Yes, Gamage. Thank you.
I'm from Louisiana, so I'm going to put a little bit of a French inflection upon it. I'm sorry.
Totally understood. So the countries that so-called abandoned wealth taxes, mostly that was during the Reagan-Thatcher era, where countries across the world were abandoning all sorts of progressive taxes based on flawed economic analysis that hasn't held up. Countries haven't abandoned the wealth tax for the most part recently. It's very effective and has been for over 100 years.
But don't I know that in France they abandoned it? That was after, I mean, I don't think of France as being under the sway of Reagan and Thatcher, but indeed it was after the Reagan-Thatcher movement that they first attempted to place, and then they abandoned?
Yes, so there's 2 issues with that. One, the French wealth tax was poorly designed. Some other wealth taxes were poorly designed and should have been abandoned because of poor designs. 2, it used to be quite easy for very wealthy individuals and families to hide wealth and income abroad. Since 2010, with the implement of FATCA, increased information technology, and other financial reporting innovations, this is now very difficult. And both income taxes with respect to wealth supposedly moved abroad, but also wealth taxes worked much, much better than they did.
So let me ask you that, because we were recently told from various people across from the IRS director, et cetera, that there's a tax gap, that there are dollars out there that need to be taxed, but they're being hidden. I think in your testimony I heard that you recommend, or maybe it's this bill, $70 billion that would go towards improving IRS enforcement, data collection, et cetera. So that suggests to me that maybe the ability to gather the data isn't as robust as your last statement seems to suggest. Am I just not connecting the dots correctly?
With respect, I'd say you're not. It's true that there is a tax gap which measures tax evasion. The tax gap is much larger for the ultra wealthy than it is for ordinary Americans. But the tax gap is teeny compared to legal tax avoidance.
No, that's my
income
point.
tax.
My point is that if these figures are so readily ascertained, oh, we can figure them out, don't worry about it, and these collection systems are so efficient that the wealth tax would now work where formerly it could not, then how are people able to evade, and why do we need to give the IRS so much more money?
People have limited, although significant, ability to evade. They have substantial ability to avoid legally the income tax because the income tax by law only collects tax if salaries are paid, stock or financial assets are sold.
But that seems to suggest to me,
it
seems like you're talking about two different things. One is the legal avoidance, and the other is the evasion. And when you told me that the income tax, the wealth tax in France didn't work because people could too easily hide income, evade, and now they can't. But nonetheless, I'm hearing other testimony that suggests that there's still substantial evasion, therefore we have to invest this money in the IRS. There actually seems to be a disconnect between these two sets of statements. Maybe I should just move on because I'm not sure that seem like we're talking past each other, but I do think my question's a valid one. Mr. Hodge, what's your perspective? Going to the other side, why did European nations abandon the wealth tax?
Well, there are three primary reasons. One is the complexity that's already been discussed and the very difficult administrable aspects of it. The other one, it raised very little revenues. In fact, Switzerland is often held up as the paragon of a successful wealth tax that's been there for more than a century, but it raises less than 4% of all tax revenues in Switzerland, so it's basically a trivial impact on their fisc. And then lastly is the avoidance issue and the fact that people can move. And this is what drove France to eliminate their wealth taxes, because the wealthy in France were fleeing, and they decided that they could live quite nicely elsewhere and not pay the tax.
Mr. Gamage, then with that statement, do you favor a worldwide wealth tax? Because that doesn't seem practical to me, but that seems to be if people can move, and they do, and if capital can move, and it does, it seems as if the one example, for example, I understand that China has an incredible capital flight, and if there's any country that's done its best to surveil everything about every one of its citizens, it's China, and yet they have significant capital flight. So would you recommend a global wealth tax?
The United States tax system, the current income tax, is citizenship-based and taxes all worldwide income for citizens and always has. This is a key difference between the U.S. tax system and the French tax system. You can't escape the U.S. tax system without revoking your citizenship and paying a substantial exit tax. That's current law, and it works quite well.
And so the idea that somebody would give up their citizenship, I think one of the partners that made a lot of money from selling, or some big Silicon Valley going public, renounced his citizenship and moved to Singapore, if I remember correctly. I'm gathering from you feel as if that problem would be minimal.
It historically has been minimal, and you pay
now,
a
historically,
big
we haven't had a
tax
wealth tax. And so I'm not sure we can use past history to predict future actions, to kind of paraphrase the financial commercial.
Again, you pay a substantial exit tax under current law by revoking citizenship. Not many people do it, some do. If they don't value the protections and services provided to citizens of the United States, then fine. But the protections and services provided to extreme wealth are huge. And most ultra wealthy benefit tremendously from being United States citizens and having those protections and services. And it's fair to have them pay a reasonable amount of tax on that, which they currently are not.
Okay. Mr. Parmelo, just to kind of spread out the questions, there seems to be a lot of, if you will, verbal sleight of hand in that people are conflating wealth and income. Now, we know people get that confused. Warren Buffett used to say that he paid more in taxes than his secretary, but I think at that time he was the richest or second richest person in the world. Excuse me. I got to take a quick recess. They just passed me a vote note. I have to go vote very quickly, but Senator Warren will be right back, and then we will resume. Quick recess, probably just minutes. You sure this is true?